Hello there, people of the internet. Every time I make videos about surplus ammunition, I get a ton of comments talking about people asking if they can break down that surplus ammunition, which might potentially have issues with like duds and hang fires because some of this stuff is nearing 100 years old. They ask if they can break it down and use it as components. And if you're a part of the gun community, like I'm sure you are if you're watching this right here, then odds are you know, yes, you can in fact do that. Now, I'm not going to show you how to actually, do that because YouTube has certain rules that I have to abide by. Hi, YouTube reviewer, I am abiding by your rules. Please bear that in mind whenever you watch this video. With that being said, I can go ahead and tell you guys that yes, it is possible. And if you want to learn how to actually get around to doing it, then, just a quick Google search will teach you how to reload ammunition. But let me go ahead and walk you guys through this. This right here, is this the one? That's not the one. This is the one. This right here is Ethiopian 8mm Mauser ammunition. This stuff came into the country, I don't know, a couple of years ago, 4 or 5 at this point. And I got videos on this stuff, but this stuff is notorious for duds and hang fires. That's going to happen way more often than not getting duds or hang fires with this stuff. So if you do buy this ammunition, just know that you're basically not going to be able to use it, and it's pretty much only going to be components. Now, whenever it comes to the Ethiopian stuff, the issue with the Ethiopian stuff is the primer and not the powder. I know that because I have used this stuff for components for reloading. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to pull the bullet out of the casing, and you're going to want to pull the powder out of the casing. Now, depending on the ammunition, most of your surplus ammunition that is duds and hang fires from, 50, 60, 70 years ago is going to be a Berdan prime priming system with a corrosive primer, so you don't want to use that primer, and you literally cannot reload that case because it is a Berdan prime case. I mean, you can reload it, but it is significantly harder than just reloading boxer primer. So I recommend just getting rid of that Berdan prime case and the primer. Just discard it, follow whatever laws it is that's in your local area for ammunition discarding. If you don't know how to discard ammunition properly, then just take it down to a gun store and they'll take care of it for you. Because there is still a live primer that is inside of that cartridge. But now you have your projectile and now you have your powder. Assuming that the powder has not been compromised or anything like that, I have gotten surplus ammunition that has had compromised powder. You don't necessarily want to use that stuff. And then there's ammunition that has like powder that has significantly degraded over the years, such as Turkish 8mm Mauser. If you want to get yourself that and you want to use that powder for reloading, then you absolutely can do that. However, bear in mind that ammunition is still using that same powder even though it has been reloaded, so the pressures are going to be equivalent of that of the original Turkish ammunition that the cartridge was originally, the original ammunition that the cartridge was originally before it was broken down, because you still are using the same powder. You can download the powder charge, and I typically do that whenever I use these for components. Not only does that get me a few extra shots whenever I am done at the end of the day, but I also get less recoil, and I don't need a full power rifle cartridge whenever I'm just out making YouTube videos plinking at the range. Don't download more than 10%. I'm going to make a whole video on the dangers of downloading ammunition and how just the changes in powder burn can cause a significant pressure spike, and that can cause some significant issues. So let me go ahead and show you guys this. This right here is a projectile that I had pulled apart earlier. This is actually a Turkish round with some powder that I had sitting around, but it'll serve for good representation purposes. So first you're going to take your projectile out of your casing. This right here is our Turkish projectile. This is a 154 grain projectile, nickel plated. I think it's pretty. Honestly, I might just save myself some of these because they're cool looking. I'm probably going to shine it up and just have one for display purposes. But you literally just, with a kinetic puller or whatever your system is, pull the projectile out, and then you have all of this gunpowder inside of this case. Well, you pour out your gunpowder, you measure it out, see how much is actually inside of that case. It should not vary more than like a grain, maybe a grain and a half with this old school surplus ammunition that was made, depending on the country, very hastily. They were not having good times back then. But you pour out your powder. This right here is actually 2200, but it does serve for our representation purposes here. You pour out your powder, and now you have yourself a case that you can discard however it is that you feel you should discard it. like I said, follow whatever laws that might be around. I don't know if states have certain ammo discarding laws. But after that, you get yourself a newly produced, or I don't know, it doesn't necessarily have to be newly produced, I guess, but you get yourself a brass case that has a boxer primer on it that you can stick a non-corrosive primer in, and that definitely helps things out. Some of the powders, depending on the country of origin, might be corrosive, but most of them are not going to be corrosive. The corrosive nature of ammunition typically comes from the primer, but there's a lot of variation with different kinds of ammunition all around the world. But this right here is a non-corrosive primer and a brand new brass case that hasn't been appropriately trimmed and sized, and etc, etc. I'm not going to show you how to do that because YouTube doesn't like that kind of stuff. But what I did was I actually took an Ethiopian projectile, and we have ourselves an Ethiopian projectile right here on the end of the cartridge, and the powder inside of the cartridge is the same exact powder from that Ethiopian projectile. You literally just pour it right in, and then you seat your cartridge or your projectile down on top. Now, I do not have an 8mm crimp die. That's not necessarily a necessary thing unless you are, well, it's not necessarily if you're going to single load your rifle, which is exactly what I'm going to do here. Typically, crimping a projectile in stops it from, you know, flying out under recoil, but this is definitely plenty tight for representation purposes of my one single shot of Ethiopian reloaded ammunition that I'm going to show you guys here. Alright, so as long as your case is appropriately sized and you have a properly seated primer and you have a properly seated bullet, your powder, as long as it hasn't degraded depending on the country of origin and as long as it is the proper amount, there you go. Whenever it comes from the factory, it's going to be the proper amount with that particular projectile. These Ethiopian rounds have around 43 grains of powder. It is a flake powder, a military flake powder, but around 43 grains because they rock a 196 to a 198 grain projectile. So that is definitely quite the hulking round. I download mine typically like by about 7% just to avoid any issues, and that definitely helps with recoil. Not only that, but I also get a lot of brass longevity. Whenever you have less pressure, your brass stretches a lot less. And with this downloaded pressure ammunition, with my measurements, I find that I can typically reload this brass 2 times-ish, you know, 1 to 2 times. But I can reload this brass 1 to 2 times without needing to trim it, because trimming is quite the process and whatnot. But as long as you pay attention and know what you're doing whenever you reload this ammunition, then you can literally just break those components apart and put it inside of new appropriate brass, and now you have a much more reliable round. If you notice, that round that I fired, although it was Ethiopian gunpowder and whatnot, it fired with no hang fire, no dud. Now, if I were to fire just straight Ethiopian ammunition, which I'm not going to do because then I have to clean this rifle because it is corrosive ammunition, if I were to fire with just straight Ethiopian ammunition, it would sound something like this. I would go, bang! And that's just the nature of the beast whenever you're dealing with this surplus ammo. 9 times out of 10, it is going to be the primers. If you just take the gunpowder and put it inside of a new casing with a new primer, then it will ignite just fine. This area is a good representation of that. After that, just for safety purposes, go ahead and check out your brass, check out everything, your primer, make sure there's no bulging, no cracks, no rippling, no nothing like that. Yeah, this looks actually very nice. The Ethiopian stuff does not burn. Well, it's not a very high pressure ammunition. In fact, it's kind of a low pressure, underpowered ammunition compared to some other 8mm Mausers out there. So that's one thing to remember if you decide to reload this stuff right here. If you do reload, don't go mixing your powders together, even if it is just military surplus powder, because these powders burn at different rate. Like, for example, the Ethiopian flake looks identical to the Turkish Mauser flake, but my god, the burn rates are very significantly different. Alright, well, ladies and gentlemen, hold on, I guess I'll give you guys this little tidbit of information. This is just what I do whenever it comes to discarding your ammunition. After you have pulled your primer out, or your bullet out and your powder out, you still have this live primer on the back. I just soak these in water to go ahead and sterilize that primer, make it to where it's not going to go off. That's something that you can do if you feel like doing that, or you can potentially just kind of save these. I mean, in the event that the world ends and you find yourself in a situation where now you have these primed cartridges, then hey, having a hang fire to launch projectiles downrange is definitely better than having nothing at all. So if you want to save these, by all means, you go ahead and you save these, but you don't have to. Anyway, folks, thanks for watching. Appreciate your time. Kind of a short-ish video, but I feel like there's a lot of value in this one. So if you find this information value, then go ahead and subscribe. If you like the video, description below, link to all sorts of stuff. Go and go check that out. That being said, you guys go off, have yourself a fantastic day, and I will see you on the next episode. Been a little while since I've done this. Bonnie and Clyde be damned. Poor man's Garen. It's a shame that bolt-action shotguns aren't more mainstream.